So today is the Sunday before Advent. Interesting in Advent that we spend all our time looking forward to God's coming in Jesus, and the whole idea of looking forward, anticipating, and here we have the Sunday before that period of anticipation. The story that recounts how Elizabeth and Zechariah gave John the Baptist his name, John, in stark differentiation from tradition, where you would name a child to embody the attributes of a family member. John wasn't a name that was in their family, but John was the diminutive form of a name that meant God's gracious gift. And Zechariah talks about salvation initially in Old Testament terms: salvation for Israel, the ability to worship freely, to be a community of righteous people, but quickly goes on to talk about salvation and forgiveness of sins in a way that Jesus would echo, of course, in his later ministry. So we have that calling and that sense of running before. And your sense is for all of us as Christians that in fact that's exactly our role. Each one of us is called to be a John the Baptist, a forerunner of other people's experience of God. To introduce, by words, but more likely by actions of love and kindness and service, each one of us is called to introduce the idea of God's reality into their lives, to make it obvious, not because we just tell people about them, but because we demonstrate how useful that is. And when, at the right time, if people ask and say, well, why do you do this? Why would you serve? Why would you love someone who wasn't part of your family? Why would you go out of your way to be selfless in your love for others? You would say, well, I know that I'm loved by God, and that same God loves all people. And so, of course, one serves. One serves as a brother and a sister to the world, because God's love is so real to each one of us. That's a striking message and an interesting calling for all Christian denominations who look in their chapels and think, well, we're getting older, we're getting smaller, how can we grow numerically? The not so new way of being church is to go back to being people, individual people, where God has placed us, and love and serve those around us. The consequences of that are not our concern. God, if we can introduce God into the lives of other people, the concept, the reality, the blessing, God will do what God will do. It is not our concern. But we are each called to love without reserve, just as we are loved ourselves. When the people heard Zechariah's speech return and his confirmation that Elizabeth's wish that the baby should be called John, the reading records that all those around were filled with fear. That's not fear in the sense of being afraid. It's fear as in being in awe at the presence of the supernatural. Here was something incredible about to happen. Here was something amazing and mystical. You could sense it. And in each of our lives, we try, as best we can, to embody the God who made all things and the God who loves us. That ought to be splendid. That ought to be awesome. That ought to be tremendous in the presence of those around us. It's a gift that we give. It's simply repaying what we've already received. Hearts so overflowing with the love of God that we look always and everywhere to share that with our brothers and sisters. So always to be a forerunner, to go ahead, to introduce, to make real the presence, the love, the forgiveness, the grace of the God who made all things. It's each one of our high and mighty calling.